Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin. Check. You already know. Let's go. Golden Blooded is a college football YouTube channel for entertainment. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let's get into our next college football video. This year was one of the weirdest years when it comes to the SEC. A lot of close games that shouldn't have been close. A lot of upsets. A lot of jumping in the polls when those teams didn't deserve that jump. It made no sense this year. I mean, it turned out okay, I guess. Like they say, everything comes out in the wash. But during the regular season, the SEC, they were all over the place. So, the final rankings, first we'll go with the SEC East, of course, finishing first. Number 1, Georgia, finishing 13-0. They will play Ohio State in the Peach Bowl. Second place, number 6, Tennessee, who finished 10-2. They'll play Clemson in the Orange Bowl. Third place, number 19, South Carolina, who finished 8-4. They're going to play Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl. That's going to be a really good game right there. Fourth place, Kentucky, finishing 7-5. They're going to play Iowa in the Music City Bowl. Fifth place, good old Florida. They finished 6-7 because they've already played their bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl, where they got demolished by Oregon State 30-3. Sixth place, Missouri, finishing 6-6. They're going to play Wake Forest in the Gasparilla Bowl. And then finally, finishing dead last, but having a better season, was Vanderbilt, finishing 5-7. Jumping on over to the SEC West, finishing in first place, number 17, LSU. This is what I'm talking about. Weird stuff going on. They finished 9-4. They're going to play Purdue in the Citrus Bowl, finishing in second place, number 5, Alabama, who finished 10-2. They're going to play Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl. Third place, number 22, Mississippi State. They finished 8-4. They're going to play Illinois in the ReliaQuest Bowl. Fourth place was Ole Miss. They finished 8-4. They're going to play Texas Tech in the Texas Bowl. Fifth place was Arkansas. They finished 6-6. They're going to play Kansas in the Liberty Bowl. And then Auburn finished in sixth place, 5-7, not going to a bowl. And dead last, seventh place, Texas A&M. Recruits at a high level, but doesn't translate onto the field. Finished the regular season 5-7. So even the final rankings, especially in the SEC West, a little bit head-scratching just because of all the tiebreakers. What about the games in the actual season? There were a lot of weird games in the regular season. Let's talk about those weird games. The first weird game was Georgia at Missouri. Now, Georgia did win this game 26-22, but they had to come from behind, and they just did not look like they got up for this game. But Georgia does finish the regular season undefeated, 13-0. They're in the playoffs. They're playing at a high level right now. But that game right there, that didn't make much sense. Speaking of Georgia, going on the road, beating Kentucky 16-6, and I realize that game never really was in doubt, but their offense didn't look good at all. They were moving the ball on Kentucky, but they just couldn't punch it into the end zone. They still get a win. Georgia finishes undefeated. Next game, Tennessee at Pitt. This was an earlier game in the season. They did win on the road 34-27, but Pitt wasn't a very good team, and Tennessee turned out to be a really good team. So the fact that that was that close and it went into overtime, meaning Pitt had a chance to beat Tennessee, didn't really make that much sense. Speaking of Tennessee, the home game against Florida, they had multiple opportunities to stretch that lead and put Florida out of their misery. Couldn't do it. They did get the win 38-33, but that was a wild game to watch. Tennessee at LSU, they absolutely demolished LSU 40-13, and then LSU later on in the season got overhyped. So taking everything into consideration, yeah, that Tennessee whooping on the road to LSU, a little bit head-scratching. And then later in the season, Tennessee goes on the road and gets whooped by South Carolina 63-38. We all knew that Tennessee didn't have good defense, but South Carolina didn't have that good of an offense. And of course, Tennessee's offense could not match those 63 points. Tennessee absolutely humiliated in Columbia, South Carolina. Speaking of South Carolina, going on the road and losing to an average Arkansas. Not just losing, but getting handled 44-30. Something was weird about that game. Later in the year, they go on the road and lose to an okay, but not great Missouri, 23-10. So let me get this straight. They put 63 on Tennessee, but only put up 10 against Missouri. This is what I'm talking about, inconsistency. And they go on the road and lose to Florida 38-6. So even worse, they absolutely did not show up against Florida. Only 6 points, and Florida had one of their worst defenses that they've had in a while. So yeah, that game definitely didn't make sense. But what happens? South Carolina, last game of the year, they go on the road and they beat Clemson 31-30. That was a weird finish for South Carolina because they blew out Tennessee the week before at home. Then they go on the road and upset Clemson. Wild SEC East this year. Speaking of wild, what about Vanderbilt surprising some teams? They go on the road and beat Kentucky 24-21. Kentucky, what are you doing losing to Vanderbilt at home? But don't worry, you have some company. I'll get to that later. Utah at Florida to start the year. All things being considered, it was weird because Utah turned out to be really, really good and Florida not so much. And Florida gets the win 29-26 over the eventual Pac-12 champs. But then later on in the year, Florida goes on the road and they lose to Vanderbilt. This is what I'm talking about. 31-24. So Vanderbilt did upset some people. Speaking of Vanderbilt, the first game of the year on the road to Hawaii absolutely blasted them 63-10. Who saw that coming? Not me. Let's talk about LSU for a minute. Well, first it was that head-scratching loss to Florida State 24-23. And I know it was because of a blocked PAT. And I also know that Florida State turned out to be a really good team. But you got to realize LSU was ranked, what, as high as number 5, number 6? So yeah, all things considered, that didn't make that much sense. And then later on the year, the last game of the year actually, LSU goes on the road and loses to a very bad Texas A&M 38-23. They didn't just lose, they got handled by Texas A&M. And that really threw a monkey wrench into the SEC plans as far as the playoffs go. Speaking of Texas A&M, they almost beat Alabama on the road 24-20. And I know Alabama wasn't as good as what they usually are, but they are still a pretty decent team having a 10-win season. Think about that. A down year and you still have 10 wins. Alabama fans haven't made. Mississippi State going on the road to Kentucky and losing 27-17. It's not just the fact that they lost, but that great offense only put up 17 points against Kentucky. And Kentucky was, not that great. So yeah, it was a little surprising. Tulsa at Ole Miss was weird because Tulsa actually put up a fight. Ole Miss does pull off the win 35-27, but that was a sign of things to come because Ole Miss was definitely overrated this year. Arkansas versus Texas A&M early in the year. A bad Texas A&M beats a decent Arkansas 23-21. The year before that, Arkansas took care of business and beat Texas A&M, but for whatever reason, they couldn't do it this year. Liberty at Arkansas. Speaking of Arkansas woes, they get beat at home by Liberty 21-19. How do you let that happen? Liberty was an okay team, but you shouldn't allow them to come into your house and beat you. But I do have to give you credit. You gave LSU a fight. LSU at Arkansas. LSU does get the win 13-10, but you definitely made LSU sweat, and that's when LSU was being overhyped. So people were starting to come back down to reality after LSU squeaked a win against Arkansas 13-10. What about the battle of teams that weren't very good? Missouri at Auburn. Auburn beats Missouri, even though I thought Missouri was a better team, 17-14 in overtime. This is what I'm talking about. You just never know in the SEC. What about LSU at Auburn? Auburn didn't get the win, but they sure put up a fight 21-17. Yeah, that's that same LSU that was being overhyped later in the year. And then the battle of the worst teams in the SEC West. Auburn squeaks off the win against Texas A&M at home 13-10. Congratulations, Auburn. You did beat the worst team in the SEC West. And then early in the year, sign of things to come, Appalachian State at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M loses 17-14. And a lot of people were saying, well, maybe Appalachian State is just that good of a team. Maybe Texas A&M is just that bad of a team. And then finally, yes, Texas A&M does beat UMass at home, but still 20-3. You are only able to put up 20 points against one of the worst defenses in the entire nation. Yeah, that's pitiful. That is straight up garbage. That's West Virginia level right there. So yeah, a lot of head scratching, a lot of close games that shouldn't have been close, and a lot of blowouts that didn't make any sense. The things that really didn't make any sense was, it looked like if you beat Alabama, then immediately you are an elite team. What happened with Tennessee? They beat Alabama and immediately they were jumped into playoff contention. Same thing with LSU. They beat Alabama. Oh, they're a playoff team. Listen, Alabama just had a down year this year. They weren't elite like they usually are. So beating Alabama, yeah, it didn't mean that you were an elite team this year. It just mean you caught Alabama on a down year. And guess what? Upsets happen. It doesn't mean that you're elite all of a sudden. And one of the craziest instances of ranking jumpings that shouldn't have happened was when Florida beat a top 10 Utah. Yes, they were top 10. They went from unranked to number 12. How hilarious is that now that we know what we know? So crazy year in the SEC. It was very entertaining, so I definitely appreciate that SEC because that's what we try to do here at Golden Blue Dude. We're not trying to be right all the time. We're just here to entertain you. So that's what the SEC did for us this year. So y'all let me know in the comments section what surprised you the most about the SEC in 2022. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.